right, how we doing, Devils fans? Day one of unrestricted free agency is now in the books and over. I'm J-Bake here with the Jersey Devils Brocast here doing our YouTube video. As always, you can check us out Tuesday nights, Radio Garden State, 9 to 10 p.m. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention Radio Garden State is having a fairly big event soon on July 2nd at Bev's in Nutley, starting at 6 p.m., 94 Bloomfield Avenue in Nutley. Going to be the 2-year anniversary of Radio Garden State, throwing a big party. Going to have all the hosts, the owners of the radio station. Chris, of course, who's running the show. Mike, who founded Radio Garden State, will be there as well. Should be a good time. So if you're in the area or if you're looking for a good time, head on down. But back to hockey. That's why we're here. But big few days for the Devils. Markstrom gone for Rodrigues and Boqvist. Gritschuk signs an extension. Nico signs an extension. Another Nico signs an extension. Nico Daws. 2 years, 1.1. Vladislav Kolyachonok. It's going to take me a long time to figure that one out, but I will. Signed. Nice seventh defenseman, and I think the move that gets people going today for Devils fans is the offer sheet for Barrett Hayton. We don't see that often. Offer sheets are kind of a taboo topic sometimes, it seems. You hear these former GMs and former presidents of hockey ops and head coaches talk about that. It's like, we kind of don't do that. But this one is very interesting. But we're going to be getting into all of it here in the show. But let's start with that. Let's start with Barrett Hayton. So reportedly, the Devils had a trade in place for Hayton from Utah on draft day. And Utah, this is from Chris Johnston, Utah backed out. And what's interesting is Sonny Maeda basically waited until the Utah Mammoth took up a lot of cap space, making other signings in a trade for like Vinny Trocheck to then pounce on this. They're offering a 1-year deal at $4.75 million, which is, funny enough, $666 under the threshold where they would forfeit a first and a third. So the Devils would only be sending over a second, which is hilarious. I think it shows Sonny Maeda has some balls, which I like. This was like a Lou Lamoriello kind of move of like, I'm getting my guy one way or another. We had a trade in place. You pulled it out at the last second. I don't like how that went down. F this, I'm going to go get my guy one way or another. And I like that attitude. And if they get Hayton, I think it's a great fit. I've said the last few weeks, one of the things I'd like to see the Devils do is get a centerman who could win a lot of faceoffs and take some defensive minutes from Nico. Now, he'll still be your primary guy in that role, but it would be nice to have a legitimate secondary guy. We talk about secondary scoring all the time and how you need those secondary scorers. You also need those secondary defensive forwards that can play tough defensive minutes. You can't just rely on one or two guys. You need a lot of them. You think the Devils teams, when they were at their best, 2000, you had a few guys. Bobby Holik, John Madden, Jay Pandolfo, Nemchinov, Claude Lemieux. You had a few guys to rotate around and take on those really tough assignments. And in Holik and Madden's case, they're centermen. So we basically had two lines that could do that. As much as the Devils had an issue in scoring, they also had an issue in matchups in that regard where their bottom six just wasn't very good. They weren't scoring. Well, specifically the fourth line couldn't score, couldn't defend, wasn't physically strong, didn't really give you much energy or really give you much at all. And in Barrett Hayton in the mix with Rodrigues and Boqvist, they have really remade that bottom six substantially. It starts to look a lot better. I like that. That was a big thing on my to-do list for the Devils coming into this season. And Barrett Hayton has a reputation of being a solid two-way forward. He was a high draft pick, was viewed as a guy that could be a top-line center, and he's ended up being a nice third-line center. And if he's your fourth-line center, that means you're really deep down the middle. So I really like that move, and I like bringing a guy like him in. I think it would work out really well here as your fourth. I've seen some fans put up different depth charts, and they kind of have him as your third line and Glass as your fourth. I'd do the opposite. To me, Barrett Hayton, like at this point in his career, he's not really a big offensive threat. He had 46 points 2 years ago, was injured last year. Really, for him, if he gives you 30, 40 points, and he just ends up being a nice secondary defensive centerman, that's a huge win for this team, and it puts their bottom six in a much stronger position than it was last year. And another way they addressed their bottom six, which there was no offer sheet, we're not in limbo on, this one actually happened, it's over, was the Markstrom trade. So I thought it was a great trade for Sonny Maeda and for several reasons. One, the Devils, again, needed help in the bottom six as badly as they could still use another big weapon in the top six. But Rodrigues is the exact type of player they need. Multiple positions, you can put him down the middle, you can put him on either wing, he can play in multiple situations, and has been described as a Swiss Army knife kind of player. Devils didn't have enough of those guys. Rodrigues reminds me a little bit of Connor Brown. Now, Brown doesn't play center. Rodrigues can take some faceoffs, could spot start at center for you once in a while. Brown could play either side, left or right wing, but Brown's can move up and down the lineup. You can pretty much put him anywhere, and he's going to give you something. He's probably better off in your bottom six, but if you got to move him up into your top six, when you got injuries or just looking for a different mix, trying to get a different type of look on one of your top lines, he's a good guy to do that and gives you more options like that. Devils could use more guys like him. A lot of teams could. It's also a big deal that they dumped the remainder of the Markstrom contract. And I think the Markstrom stuff, it's like, I made a comment and this was on Facebook, about how if you had polled Devils fans at the end of the 2025 season, most of them would have been in favor of an extension for Jacob Markstrom. He had a solid season. And he also played very well in the playoffs that year. Devils lost in 5, but it wasn't on Markstrom. It was just they lost after team injury, and they were playing Carolina. But that extension, the timing, when Markstrom really wasn't playing well, and then the fact that it just got worse and worse and worse. He never really recovered. He played his best, really, in the Olympics for Sweden. Worries me a little bit that Florida is okay taking him on because they seemingly make every right decision. So who he went to, I'm like, oh, do they maybe see or know something that he still has something left in the tank here and the Devils are giving up a little too early on him? But I think either way, the extension was going to be a weight on this roster. And they got out from under that. And they didn't have to retain any of the salary either. They were able to just clean cut, move on from that. Which opens up more money for some other needs. Such as bringing in Rodrigues in this trade, Barrett Hayton, and I'm hoping we still see a few more before this is all said and done. But I also like the acquisition of Jesper Boqvist. Another guy, like I said, with the fourth line and the third line and needing a little bit of help down there. Now, is he, and similar to Hayton, similar to Cody Glass, a guy that was drafted to be a more prominent player in your lineup? He was a second-round pick in 2017. Good friends with Nico Hischier, good friends with Brad, and that whole crew. It's like he's coming back. He was part of what we were hoping would be a young group that would be around for a while with the likes of Izaka as well. It didn't necessarily turn out that way. His last season was 2023 with the Devils. He had 10 goals, 11 assists, 21 points in 70 games. Followed in Boston, 47 games, 6, 8, and 14. Florida, that's really where he found his game. A different style, something different than what he came up playing. But either way, he found a spot for himself. 78 games, 12 goals, 11 assists, 23 points. But the big one here is 191 hits. He became a much more physical player. He's not a big guy. 6'1", 191. He's not Tom Wilson down there, right? He's not going and murdering people left and right. That's not going to happen. But 191 hits. He's a great skater. Again, you can put him in different situations too. The last few years, he's taken well over 100 faceoffs. Like you got to put him in that position once in a while. He can do it. He's not great at it. Not great on faceoffs. Frankly, he's worse than Jack Hughes on faceoffs. So that's the only weakness in Jack's game. But if you got to put him there, you can survive for a few games. If he ends up starting on your fourth line and he's giving you something, that's great. I mean, you just see the options right now with Rodrigues and Boqvist versus Siplikov. And, listen, I thought Glendening was solid, but, I mean, you could probably do better. We just let Cotter walk. He's in Vancouver. I think Boqvist is a better overall player than Cotter because he can give you just other things that Cotter just wasn't. Lemico was basically a zero. I already said Siplikov, but he was virtually a zero as well. They didn't give you anything. You had Andre Palat on the fourth line for a while. Didn't really give you much. Now, Stefan Nason is an interesting player there because he was hurt last year. Year before, he was great. We'll see if he can bounce back or if he's still even here. There's still ways to go here in the offseason. But I like Boqvist over most of those players. I like, obviously, Rodrigues over most of those players, all of those players. If they pull off this offer sheet for Hayton, I like him over all of those players. So they have upgraded in different ways. And not necessarily the flashiest way, but a guy like Boqvist, he's found a spot for himself. He's going to throw his weight around. He's going to get some energy. He's going to play a physical game. Go watch the 2012 run and tell me if the CBGB line gave that team a little bit of energy. They did on a nightly basis in a playoff run. Even when they didn't score, they were giving you something. They were playing physical. They were forechecking hard. You can put Steven Gianta on a penalty kill. You could put Bernier in front of the net on a power play. Carter can mix and match a little bit on a penalty kill as well and just play some minutes up and down the lineup. They were physically not the biggest guys, but played a strong game. Didn't back down. And maybe we could get a fourth line like that finally. And it looks like we have the makings of that a little bit. So I think that's a nice upgrade. So overall, I really like that Markstrom trade a lot. I think it was a good one for Sonny Maeda. Now, I will say, listening to the NHL Network earlier today, a lot of guys really like that trade for Florida too. Devils fans don't want to hear it, and I'm not trying to piss everybody off and get everybody all worked up and upset. I'm sorry. If I put this up on one of the fan forums right now, I would be getting eaten alive. But I'm just telling you the truth. There are many people around the NHL that do think Florida might have won this trade because they believe Markstrom will bounce back to form next year. We will see. But from what we know from last year, that extension looked bad. It was $6 million a year. It was way too much. It was a bad contract by Fitzgerald. If he had waited, no extension, Markstrom signs for $2-3 million this year instead. That's a palatable situation. The 6, that's the problem. It's sort of like this Darnell Nurse trade that happened, believe to San Jose, and they took on all of his salary. And the line I heard today on that was, it's not the fact that he's not a bad player. He's a solid mid-pairing physical defenseman. It's the salary that's the problem. You're paying him to be a number one guy, and he's just not. Markstrom getting $6 million a year. He's being paid to be a consistently solid goalie, 1A guy. And he didn't give you that at all last year. But now the question is, who do they bring in? And this is where I think it could get very interesting to see how analytical will Sonny Maeda get. Because all of these moves so far, analytics have clearly played a role. Almost all of these guys are pretty good analytic players. But goaltending is a tough one. I mean, let's think of the names that have been available now. Some of these guys have already signed, but Merzlikins in Columbus, negative 7.3 goals saved above expected last year. Bobrovsky just signed that deal in Toronto, negative 12.2. Montembeault has been rumored as being available, negative 4.9. Markstrom was negative 11.9. Skinner was plus 8.3. He went to Winnipeg. Binnington, negative 22.4. Aiden Hill, negative 14.2 on a team that went to the finals, mind you. And Hellebuck, plus 5.5 and on a team that sucked last year. But that stat's supposed to kind of even the playing field of like, this is what was expected, right? So my point with that is, and then if you want to go to the old school stats with all those guys and look at save percentage and goals against average, you're kind of going to see the same thing. They're not that much better than Markstrom. They're all kind of in that ballpark of 89% save percentage, goals against around 3, not strong seasons last year. They're all hope they bounce back kind of guys, just like Markstrom. And virtually every goalie on the market has a lot of red flags. Maybe I would have taken a flyer on Freddie Anderson, who signed a fairly team-friendly deal. I believe that was with Edmonton. But I don't want to be wrong on that, so let's double-check here. Yes, 1-year deal. See, I was right. I'm right sometimes. 1 year at $2.8 million, which doesn't seem too bad for a guy that just played very well in the playoffs. But Anderson is a very atypical, solid goalie. He'll go on a run for 2-3 weeks. He'll play really, really well. Have a week or two not so well. Bounce back and play well for a while. Week or two not play well. Bounce back again. It's just this wild inconsistency across the league with goaltending. And the Devils did sign Daws to a $1.1 million contract, $1.1 a year for 2 years. His goals saved above expected, incredibly small sample size, was 0.4. But the average per 60 minutes was very similar to Jake Allen. And Allen was a plus 6.3 goals saved above expected last year, which put him in the 20-ish range of a solid year for Allen. So Daws, you extrapolate that over a full season, he'd be not 6.3, but he'd be close. He'd be plus 4, plus 3. Not stellar. The best goalies in the league are over like plus 20, like Logan Thompson and Shesterkin and Sorokin last year and all those guys. But it's still okay. Like, that's a manageable number. So maybe Daws is the best option that's left. Again, I don't think the options are great. It's a one-way contract for him, too, so maybe Sonny Maeda's thinking the same thing and is going more for the value contract for goalie rather than swing big. And I think goalies are like relievers in baseball. It's wildly unpredictable, and it's like buyer beware for the big contract. I'm a Mets fan. I've seen the Mets blow this one a billion times, spending a ton of money on relievers and closers and just having it be an utter disaster. But I wonder if Maeda will like a moneyball that position like we're seeing successful teams in baseball moneyball that with relievers or closers. And being similar as like it's just year to year, you just don't know what you're going to get from these guys. You might want to shy away from the long-term commitment. And there aren't many goalies who've been consistently good year to year. There are a few for sure. We got the 3 big Russians, or Shesterkin and Vasilevsky and Sorokin. Those Sorokin had a down year, in 25, and then bounced back last year. Hellebuck is another one. He's multiple Vezinas. Had a down year last year on a bad team. I'd say pretty good chance he'll bounce back, especially if Winnipeg is better. Jake Ottinger's been solid, not the best year last year, but he's had a fairly good career. Jeremy Swayman in Boston, there's still some guys. I'm not saying there's nobody, but it just seems like the rest of the group in the league is all over the place. Wedgwood and Blackwood, they've been all over the place. They're the best goalie tandem in the league last year, and a few years ago, they were both wondering if they'd even have a job in the NHL. And that's just the way this game has been going. That's just the way things are. So maybe the Devils are better off going with Daws and Allen. Could you get a veteran guy on a 2-way contract for some insurance? I sure would like that. I'm very uncomfortable with Daws and Allen, but they might not have much of a choice. And again, the surefire guys, they're not available. Hellebuck kind of is, but that rumor's been circulating all over the place. From where he was getting traded to Buffalo to it wasn't really that serious, to he wasn't. He's going to Carolina. But it might be wiser for the Devils to spend that capital elsewhere and make a smart goalie acquisition rather than a big one. And who knows, maybe Sonny Maeda and his guys, they believe that Yegorov isn't as far off as maybe some people think and is the real deal. And it's going to be the long-term answer at some point. They don't want to block him out, or you spend all that money in trade capital for a long-term commitment and goal when you already have a guy that will solve that long-term problem. It's about getting to him and bridging the way. If they roll with Allen and Daws, they are going to need some insurance. But, I mean, we know Allen did sign, I think it was a 5-year deal, but it's for very little annual value. Daws is only 2 years. So, to bridge that to Yegorov, maybe that makes some sense. But I would like to see them get some sort of insurance policy. Now, you're not going to get an insurance policy that's Marty Brodeur waiting in the minors to come up and take over for you. But could you get a solid guy in a two-way deal that maybe has a little bit of upside that you can take a flyer on if you need to, or if you have an injury? Because if you do go with Allen and Daws, you don't have a lot of depth at that position. That's going to be a problem. And that was an area that in 2025 was a good thing for the Devils. They had depth there where Markstrom was playing well, Allen played well. You had Nico Daws waiting down in Utica. You had 3 options. With Allen and Daws only, you don't have those options down below. So they might want to try and get something else there in the organization, a guy to play in Utica to do that. But I think that's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be very, very interesting to see how the goaltending situation plays out. And if I had to predict, which I guess I have to now, I'm going to say it's going to be a smart goalie acquisition based off of analytics and not spending a lot of trade capital and money and making some big move. But we will see. Now watch them get Hellebuck in the next 2 days and I look ridiculous. But moving on. 2 guys were retained by the Devils, signed new extensions. We'll start with the lower value and work our way up. Okay. So you know who I'm starting with, Arsenij Griciuk, signed for 3 years at $3.25 million. I think it's outstanding value for this kid. And, you know, I'm not in the camp of like he's going to be a 40-goal scorer and shock the world. I really don't think that. But I think it's absolutely reasonable that he ends up being a consistent 25-goal guy and makes this contract an awesome deal for the Devils. We talked about needing a sniper in that top 6. We've all talked about needing these young kids to step in and produce something. I think he could solve those problems. A lot of the analytical projections had him at over $4 million a year or around that. The fact they came in under that, I think, was great. Every dollar counts. Last year, 13 goals, 18 assists, 31 points. But I think the big number is Corsi 4 was 58%. And also think about the rotating group of players he was with last year. He played well with Glass and Brown. Then he played with Glass and Haminaho. Then he played with kind of with Cotter and Palat and Bukestad. He played all over the place. They put him up in the top 6 here or there. Guy gave him some power play time. The fact that he had very good possession numbers while playing with many players that did not play well last year, I think says a lot about the quality of player he is overall, not just a scorer, but he's a good player. So I think this contract could look great for the Devils over the next 3 years. And he's an older rookie. He was 24 years old last year. Maybe at that age and some maturity, the sophomore slump just might not be an issue for him. Because if he could go into next year and give you, let's say, 20 to 25 goals and 25 assists, get you 45 to 50 points, I think that's huge. That's huge. Gives you some more depth, gives you some more options. As you can tell, that's how I like to build a lineup. Give me options and a lot of guys throughout the lineup to contribute. And if he works out, there you go. And that was a problem I thought for Fitzgerald, was young guys like Griciuk coming in and not working out. Alexander Holtz, who was, supposed to be the 40-goal sniper to flank Jack Hughes. Never worked out. There's some other guys deep in the draft that had some promise, didn't work out. You have to have these guys work out if you want to have long-term success. You need to have your young players come in and contribute in one way or another if you want to have long-term success. They could, I'm not going to say it's paramount that Gritzuk works out, but I do think it's important if they want to really compete and move up the standings next year from a bubble team to a team that's fairly safe as a playoff team. They just might not be in that top 3 or 4 in the conference. They're going to need a guy like Gritzuk to step up, especially if they don't go out and acquire another sniper. They're going to need him to step in and fill that role to an extent. But I like the contract. I believe in him. I think he's going to be a great player. And I could see 55, 60-point seasons in his future if all works out. Now moving on to the big extension. Our hero, our captain, Nico Hischier, $11.7 million a year for 5 years. Seems like a very popular deal. I think we're all very happy about it. I don't think Nico's been the problem with the team failures. I think he's part of the solution. I think he's a core guy. I think it takes leaders time to learn the role. Just look at Steve Yzerman. How long did it take him? He had to change his game around in his second half of his career before they won cups. Joe Sakic took a while. Our own Scotty Stevens debuted in the mid-'80s, didn't win a cup until 95. And for all the Facebook warriors out there that will say trade Nico, he hasn't won anything, many of you would have traded Stevens and Steve Yzerman in that time. Took Mario Lemieux, 6 years? 7 seasons? Steven Stamkos, took him over 10. You know, not everyone is Jonathan Toews or Sidney Crosby and wins a cup right away. The team not giving him the tools for success is not his fault. Same with Jack. They haven't been surrounded with better players. So I think this contract, though, is great. And I retweeted yesterday on our page a great graph about Quinn Hughes' projected salary that I think put Nico's in perspective. You know, I mean, Quinn's probably going to be getting the max allowed, right? Which right now is around $17 million a season. The top echelon guys, that's what you're looking at in the very near future. Nico, who is, I wouldn't say top echelon, the top guys, but it's close. Being at 11.7, well under that, I think is very fair. I won't say this is a great value contract like Gritzuk could be, but I think it's a very fair deal for both sides. And for what Nico brings to the table, I mean, complete 200-foot player, wins 1,000 faceoffs a season, averages 65 points a year while playing against the top guys on the other team. He does not have favorable matchups for him. He's playing the toughest matchups you have, putting up 65 points a year. That's phenomenal. And plays in every situation incredibly well. Need a guy on a power play? Put him on a power play. Need him on a penalty kill? Do the penalty kill. Need him to play tough defensive minutes at the end of the game? Put him out there. Got Sidney Crosby out there? Put out Nico. There aren't many guys like that in the league. Very few. Well, okay, maybe not very few, but there aren't. It's not like there's 32 of them lying around. Is he as good as Barkov? No. I'm not going to say he's as good as Bergeron or Toews, but his stat line sure is very similar. And I'll say this, if Nico wins a cup or two, he'll be in the conversation with Patrice Bergeron and Jonathan Toews. He's part of the solution. And in a quote from Boqvist in his presser that I thought was interesting was, "It means the world to me in terms of playing with Nico again." This is from Christy Flannery. Such a great guy, such a great player, great leader and a great friend, and you see how hard he works every day, drags you into the fight, and that's the captain you want. Like, I don't think he would just say that just to make Nico happy on this great day. And, let me blow some smoke up the captain's ass now that I'm back on the team here and say some nice stuff. Like, I really don't think that's the case. He means it. And a lot of players have said that. Brian Boyle on the NHL Network has talked about how you could see Nico being a leader very early in his career when Boyle was here. Nico's part of the solution. And I really like this deal. I think we all would have preferred the max term of 7. But, I'd assume the Devils basically have the next 2-3 years to really right the ship and show that they are going to be a legitimate force in the league and that it's going to be worth his while to stick around after this and to be here for the rest of his career, as Jack is going to be the same. But to wrap up this YouTube episode, and thanks again for listening, figured out I'll kind of get into how my feelings on Maeda's offseason right now. We've seen a lot of criticism of him. We've seen people jumping through the roof for how great they think he's done. There's a lot of things I like, more things I like than not. But right now, I'd give him a B. I really like the contracts for Nico and Grits. I think Nico's contract is very fair. Gritsio could be a great value. I like the Markstrom trade for Rodrigues and Boqvist. I really like this offer sheet stuff with Barrett Hayton. I think it's great. I also like the fact showing a set of balls. He's going out and trying to get the guys he wants and making the effort. So you do wonder what's going on behind the scenes that we don't know. But I would have liked to see him maybe be in on Victor Arvidsson. And again, I'm not an insider. Who knows what? Maybe they had a conversation. Maybe he didn't want to come. Who knows? Because the deal he got wasn't that crazy. Some of the other players that I'd marked out as guys I would have wanted them to get, like Marchman or Anders Lee, got some deals that I'm not sure I would have been comfortable with. Marchman's getting a lot of money, north of $6 million a year. Anders Lee got, a 3-year deal, I want to say. Not sure. But multiple years for a guy at 35, I wasn't really too keen on that. I was hoping, could you bring Anders Lee in on a 1-year deal next year? But, he's not anticipating retiring anytime soon. So, go get what you get, man. That's great. I don't know if I would have been the team to give him that. There were a lot of bad contracts that went out there today. I'm glad Sonny Maeda stayed away from that, frankly. But with all that being said, you look at this lineup from top to bottom. If you're going to roll with Meyer, Hischier, and Mercer as your first line, Bratt, Hughes, and Brown as your second line, which is what we ended the season with for the most part, Gritsuk and Glass and Rodrigues on your third line, and maybe Boqvist, Hayton, and Nason on your fourth line, I think that's a competitive group. I think the bottom 6 is certainly better than it was last year. I think it's a better team than it was a few days ago, but I wouldn't say it's substantially better. I'd like to see them get maybe some toughness in the lineup. Again, we're way past the years of the goon squads as your fourth line, though that was fun. I'm 37 years old. I did get to enjoy some of that. To see Christoph Oliwa and Peluso, McKenzie. I'm going to cry. I'm not going to cry. Those days are over, right? We're not going to have that anymore. You need a fourth line that can give you something more than just fighting. But the Devils don't really have anyone that can stick up for their guys. I mean, this team on paper going into Florida is going to get murdered. And that was an issue in 2024. Remember the stuff with Rempe? And I hope that they don't have that again. I would like to see them get some toughness in the lineup somewhere. I know you got Brendan Dillon for now and Kovacevic for now, and they stick up for guys and they're dropped the mitts. But they don't really have anybody else. You do still need those guys, especially come playoff time when it becomes a war. You need to have guys that stick up for your guys. That if you're going to go after Hughes and Nico, I almost said Parisi because that's my example. There's going to be a price to pay. I remember Chris Pronger just manhandling Parisi in 2010. I was at game 1. And just like, is anyone going to stick up for this guy? Are we going to start doing a little bit of this to the Flyers? You got to have that. You got to be able to counter that a little bit. I'm not so sure the Devils have really any of that right now. So I'd like to see some toughness. And I think more so than anything, I still would like to see them get a sniper in the top 6. Regardless of if Gritsuk takes a step forward or whoever else, I would like to see them really get a legitimate 30-goal scorer into that top 6. And who knows? That could still be in the works. There's a lot of time left. The offseason really just began. Also seems that with the signings today, they have kind of virtually a full roster. I think they got 22 out of 23 spots right now. So some trades might still be in the mix. You might see guys like Mercer go. Maybe there are some other guys with the no trade, no movement clauses that they can convince to go somewhere. We'll see. All in all, I'll give him a B. I think his hands are tied, too, with all these no trade, no movement clauses. You have to be realistic. He's not going to go and trade away half the roster because he can't. You know, if you wanted to flip Meyer for this guy, well, Meyer is going to say no. You can't. Dougie Hamilton, we've seen the drama with that. Several other guys on the back end. We've seen how that has really affected the ability to construct a competitive roster when you're not able to move on from guys that are holding you back because of these no trade, no movement clauses, and that's an issue for Maeda. You know, that's a problem. But hopefully we can kind of get through that a little bit. I mean, even Connor Brown has one. Nason has one next year. He has a modified no trade clause, 7-team no trade list. So maybe you can make that one work and free up some money in a spot there and go acquire a top 6 forward, move somebody down the lineup. Maybe Brown gets pushed down to your 4th line, and now you just have an excellent 4th line going into next year. Who knows? But either way, I would like to see another top 6 guy. If they can do that, get a little bit of toughness in this lineup, I think we've had a fairly successful offseason, all things being said. And we're going to go into next year with definitely playoff aspirations. And maybe more. But thanks again for tuning in on our YouTube video here on the Jersey Devils Brocast. I'm Jay Bake. You can catch us Radio Garden State every Tuesday night, 9 to 10 o'clock. You can follow us on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, and here on YouTube. Comment, like, subscribe. If you think I'm wrong, let me know. I love the debates. Love the debates. So anyways, I will be taking next week off. I'll be on vacation, but I will be having some YouTube videos coming out next week. And of course, I'll be trying to keep up with all the news, posting everything up as it comes in to keep everybody up to date. And just continue the conversations with all the fellow Devils fans out there, which I love having. But anyways, we're finally wrapped this up. Thanks for tuning in, folks, and we'll see you soon.